I'm sure you've heard the definition of insanity as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. But I'm sure you've also heard that you have to be consistent to really achieve anything meaningful or getting those lasting results. In fact, consistency, or doing the same thing over and over again, is what leads to those massive breakthroughs in your business and your life. I know, I've seen it. But they kind of sound like the same thing. What's the difference between insanity and consistency? Well, ultimately, it comes down to one thing: intention. It's really the difference between having a strategic approach and having a plan to get a specific outcome, and just being stuck in a pattern with no direction. You know, my coach likes to say it like this: in order to get true success, you do have to keep rowing the boat. You do have to have consistency, but you have to be in the right boat, rowing in the right direction. You know, I like to think of it like fishing in the desert, right? That's insanity. You can have the best fishing gear, and you can have this burning desire and all these strategies to catch fish, but if you're casting your line on the dirt or the sand, you're never going to catch anything. So consistency, it is about persevering. It is about doing those same things over and over and having a dedication to that goal, and you're going to have some sustained effort over time. You know, I'll give you some examples. So when I first started each one of my 3 different companies, in order to get anything off the ground, I had to do certain things over and over with consistency before I ever saw results. So when you first started your business, if you're in real estate, you had to, make those cold calls over and over. You had to do the door knocking over and over. You had to do the social media marketing over and over and over before you finally got results, right? I marketed for each of my businesses for months before I got any actual traction. I'll give you an example in my health as well. So I lost almost 100 pounds in the last 2 years, and I've kept it off. But when I first started my workout program, I started changing things. It took me almost 4 months to actually start losing weight. I didn't lose a single pound for 4 months. In fact, when I first started, I actually gained weight, but I stayed consistent. I stuck to it, and it led me to being today healthier than I think I've ever been in my life. And I'm not saying this to brag. I say it because I stayed consistent, and I want you to know that it's possible. But I followed really 3 keys to intentional consistency, because remember, that's the difference. There's 3 really keys to effective and intentional consistency. The first one is you got to have a clear goal. This is going to be your guiding star. It's like your compass that keeps you moving forward. Did you ever have that unfortunate experience of playing pin the tail on the donkey when you were a little kid, or maybe when you weren't so little? You know, if you don't know what it is, basically there's a picture of a donkey on the wall. It's like a party game, and someone gives you a tail with like a push pin in it, and they spin you around with a blindfold on, and you have to try and get the tail on the donkey's rear end. That's basically how most of us are trying to accomplish our goals. We don't have any clear goals or clear outcomes, or, like I like to say, a compelling future. You know, that's another thing my coach says: fuzzy targets don't get hit. You know, if something's blurry or if you're blindfolded, you're never going to get to that goal. So you have to have clear goals and clear outcomes. You know, most people don't actually know what they want. That's probably one of the hardest questions for people to answer. You know, with all the people that I work with, that's one of the hardest things for them to nail down is, what do you actually want? So work on figuring out what you actually want, and that's the difference between insanity and consistency. Number 2 is you have to have a plan to actually get there. Your plan's like your roadmap. You know, it gives you those steps and helps you get organized and disciplined and start building that consistency. So think about, if I live in Orlando, Florida. So if I jumped in my car with no direction, no phone, no maps, nothing, and just started driving west, what are the chances that I'm actually going to end up in LA? Probably pretty low. And God forbid I start driving east, right? But if I have a map, or even better, if I have a GPS with the start and stop location, and I have specific steps, specific actions to get to my destination, then there's a pretty good chance I'm going to get there in a good amount of time, and I'm going to be happy, and everything's going to work out the way that I thought, because I had a plan. So you have to have at least some sort of strategy. You know, most people just start throwing things at the wall and hoping something's going to stick. The other thing I want to say is model proven practices. That's the GPS. That's the map. Find someone that's already got the maps. You don't have to figure out everything on your own. That's one of the reasons that I feel like coaching is so powerful. It's been so powerful in my life because I didn't have to figure out every single last step. You know, when I first started my first company, I made like no money. Like I couldn't figure out this marketing thing. I couldn't figure out how to get it to work. But everything changed when I hired a coach because they helped me develop strategies and they helped me stay consistent. So coaching is so huge. That's one of the best ways to model proven practices in real time and get that real time feedback, because then you can go so much quicker. And by the way, if you're a real estate professional and you want help with that, you want help building that plan, building the map, getting those GPS coordinates and all those steps, get on a discovery call with me. There's a link somewhere on this page that just says discovery call, and let's set up a call and let's figure out how to make that happen. That's my specialty. That's what what lights me up. So if that's something you're interested in, just book that. So that's the second thing. The third thing is evaluate regularly and be prepared to pivot. So this is about being flexible. You know, so many times that's another big difference between insanity and consistency, because insanity really truly is doing the same thing over and over. But when you start to evaluate and you assess your situation and your progress and you find areas of improvement, that's where the consistency comes in. So you got to be prepared to adjust. You got to be prepared to pivot. And when you get new information, then you just make those minor changes. It's the minor things, it's the small things that lead to huge results. You know, I like to think of it as like an airplane that flies from California to Hawaii. And they have a very specific trajectory that they have to follow to get from California to Hawaii, right? But if they're just 1 degree, 1 to 3 degrees off, they could end up hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from Hawaii, away from their destination, right? So those little shifts can make a massive difference. Think about that in your own life and start making those little shifts. Don't be too rigid to the plan. Yes, make the plan, but be prepared to adjust. And then there's another caveat there. So have the ability to pivot, but also have the willingness to pivot, because there's a lot of people that have that ability. They have the skills, they have the capabilities, but they're not willing to make the pivot. So you've got to learn how to change in real time. You got to be able to make those pivots. You know, sometimes consistency and insanity can feel kind of like the same thing, especially when you're not getting the results that you thought you would, and you're just going over and over and over. You just can't seem to break through. But the biggest reward you get from consistency is you build character and you build integrity. When you follow through consistently, you build an identity as someone who keeps their word to yourself. And the worst person you can lie to is yourself. You know, I want to challenge you this week. Pick an activity, pick something, set a definite, clear goal, create a plan, create an outline with steps to get there. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it shouldn't be perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect. The one of the biggest things that's going to hold you back is perfectionism. So it doesn't need to be perfect. Just build yourself a plan and just go and be prepared to pivot as you go. Remember, consistency creates habits. Habits create a lifestyle, and a lifestyle creates your destiny and your legacy.